Hey, everybody.
Thanks for tuning in to the Hanging On to Hope podcast.
I'm Brenda J.
And I'm Karen Wonder.
And we are HangingOnToHope.org.
This podcast is intended as educational and is not psychological or medical advice. Always consult a professional when needed, and we disclaim any liability in connection with the instruction, information, or advice given.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Hanging On to Hope podcast. This is Brenda J. Today, we have Dustin Bailey on the show. Dustin is a regional mental health champion for Celebrate Recovery and has a PhD in general psychology. He also studied forensic psychology, addiction counseling, Christian studies, and applied business management. He was also in the Air Force. Thank you for your service. I listened to Dustin's testimony at Celebrate Recovery, and I love how he passionately uses all he's been through to help others. So welcome to the show, Dustin.
Thank you very much for having me. I really appreciate it.
Yes.
So hi, Dustin. This is Karen. So nice to meet you.
Hi.
Hi. So can you tell us a little of your testimony and how it led up to becoming a mental health champion?
Absolutely. I grew up in a loving but strongly dysfunctional family. I think a lot of people can relate to that, where my mother and my father were kind people, but at the same time, not necessarily kind to each other. And a lot of that had to do with perhaps undiagnosed mental illnesses in their lives, but there was a lot of conflict. There was a lot of back and forth that happened in my family of origin, which caused me to start to react to other people in a way of performing to receive their approval and be able to try to do the dance to get the cookie, as I like to call it. A lot of my history and my life has been surrounded by performance for acceptance and codependency and things like that, which played very well into my first experiences with mental health challenges. I was newly married and I had a family that was growing, and I started to realize that I couldn't regulate my moods very well. I found myself going from anxiety to depression and back again, all without any real triggers. During my depressive times, I had very little energy. I had no way of being able to maintain myself emotionally. I'd go days with little or no sleep. I'd often go without being able to even take a shower, brush my teeth. I'd spend all my energy at work and leave none left for my family, leaving my wife to kind of do everything with raising our growing family all by herself. Because of that, I felt this sense of continuous shame and guilt and had no way of being able to have the energy to do anything about it. I like to tell people during those times, it's kind of like if someone were to give you the option to give you $1 million if you did something that you really love doing, and all you have to do is do it, and they give you the $1 million, and there's no way you could find the energy in your body to even do it, even though it's something that you absolutely love and it's something that they're going to reward you for. You still couldn't do it. That was a lot about what my depressive times were like. The other half of those were these manic anxiety-filled times where I would be so emotionally unstable that the people around me didn't know if I was going to be overly affectionate or angry or happy or anything like that. I couldn't control my thoughts and my mind would constantly race. And I go several days without sleeping there as well. Couldn't exercise sound judgment and was totally unpredictable and would make really damaging life decisions during those times. And so I would alternate back and forth between these periods of anxiety and depression and not understanding what's going on. It was after a failed suicide attempt that I finally was scared enough to seek professional help. And the doctor that I saw explained that what I had been experiencing with these highs and these lows had a name, and it was bipolar disorder. And so he prescribed a series of treatments for me, medications, some counseling, changes in my diet and my sleep routine, just wellness things that I could be doing that would help improve my health. And I saw some drastic changes for the better happening pretty quickly because of them. So I followed these approaches that the doctor gave me until I started feeling better. And then I was like, well, I'm better. I don't need any of these things anymore. I'm finally cured. But it wasn't long after that being cured that I relapsed back into all of my old behaviors, because once I stopped taking the medication, I stopped being able to sleep and stopped being able to think clearly and lucidly. And then I found myself right back into my old patterns and routines of life, and it was causing a negative toll on my family. Eventually, my wife had finally had enough, and so she took half the kids and left, and that was a low point for me, where I realized that I couldn't do this by myself, and it was in that moment that I surrendered everything that I had and everything that I was to Jesus Christ. I hit my knees physically and spiritually and said, Lord, I'm tired of trying and failing at doing this by myself. I want you to do it and show me what to do. And it was at that moment that I felt the very arms of God around me, holding me and comforting me. And I heard his spirit whisper to me that it's all right, that I wasn't alone. It was okay to ask for help. And then he put people in my life. He put my daughter in my life, my oldest daughter, and she directed me to this thing at her church called Celebrate Recovery. And I went there absolutely unsure of what to expect. I went into the first meeting kind of scared and a little freaked out, to be honest. There weren't very many people in the room, but they were all going through something, some kind of hurt, some kind of hang up, some kind of habit. And I didn't understand still being able to sing and still being able to celebrate and to praise and to have joy in your life, even though you were struggling with something. And so I decided I was just going to walk out the back door. And so when the first opportunity came to do that, they have this thing called a CHIP celebration where people celebrate various links of victory over hurts, habits, and hang-ups. I took that opportunity. I'm like, this is my chance to walk out the back. No one will ever see me. And as I started walking out, another guy of my same age walked right towards me, but then he turned and went up to the front and he took a blue chip, which is a day one first timers chip. And he said, I'm here because I have bipolar disorder and I don't know what to do. And I said, okay, fine, God. What's the likelihood of a person, such a small group, on their very first night, the very first time I had my very first night, having the same issue as I did, only being brave enough to walk forward and start this journey? So I started too. And that got me in the doors of Celebrate Recovery. And over the past 12 years, I've been working a recovery program that's helped me learn how to surrender my codependency to God and depend on Him for things, and to let the things that are in my world be mine and the other people's worlds be theirs. And He's also working on this sense of stewarding this bipolar disorder that God has created in me on purpose and for His purpose. I firmly believe that I serve a God that doesn't make mistakes, that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, and that I'm designed by God with bipolar disorder as part of my design. And I'm learning that one of the big reasons for that is it allows me to connect with other people who have similar struggles and with mental health challenges in a way that only people that have these experiences can understand. I can tell somebody that I'm going through a med change, and a lot of folks that don't have any experience in mental health would be like, oh, okay, and wouldn't really understand it. But if I tell somebody that's been through this process, hey, I'm going through a med change, they know how serious and how struggling and how hard that can be on your mind and on your body. So this is a way that I can offer experience, strength, and hope to somebody else that's going through mental health challenges and doesn't know where to turn, and can talk about the restorative and redemptive power of Jesus Christ in our lives as we walk out our design for His will in our lives, exactly as we are, with whatever mental health challenges or recovery areas that we have. And we all have something that we work through, that God can still be at the center of that and bring us to His purpose for our lives and the joy He has for us. And that's kind of how I ended up working through mental health and Celebrate Recovery. And I've had the opportunity since then to start working in the ministry side of that, which is working as a regional mental health champion, which basically talks to Celebrate Recoveries. There's 45,000 of them across the world. And we talk to these Celebrate Recovery meetings and try to get one person in each of these meetings that's a mental health champion who will start the conversation about mental health and will make sure that the stigma gets broken down and that people are accepted exactly where they're at, and help people walk through this as just another part of getting closer to God and better in their recoveries.
Wow. So the goal is to have a mental health champion at every Celebrate Recovery?
Absolutely.
Oh, that's great.
It's just so important to have the support.
Yeah.
What you're doing. And I saw and felt the passion that you have to just help as many people as you can. And that is so rare.
Yeah.
It is so rare. And that you can
so
tell
needed.
that God put that in you. It's not something we just have on our own.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
and I'm sure having gone through what you've been through, that's one way you can use it to encourage other people.
Yeah.
It's one of the most amazing things that I've found is that God took this one part of my life that had caused me the most difficulty, the most pain, and the most struggle, and He turned it into something beautiful, something that I could use to help other people who were going through that struggle too. And it won't say that it made it worthwhile. I wouldn't sign up for a lot of the things that I had experienced through this process, but God's still using it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like with me, with my abuse story. It turned into something beautiful, but yeah, you have to allow God to do that.
Yeah.
You have to allow Him to work through you and go through that soul healing as well.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've been praying for an expert to speak on the current state of mental health in the world, and I was so touched by your integration and the recognition of the importance of a relationship with Jesus Christ in healing. Whether it's healing from abuse, mental health conditions, any part of life, we need God. Can you go over some of the current mental health statistics? And do we know what some of the causes that have contributed to these conditions? I remember you saying 1 in 3 people struggle with mental health and 2 in 3 struggle at Celebrate Recoveries.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. I think that there's this perception in the public mind that mental health challenges are something that only those people or a few people struggle with. And then because of that, there's a feeling of isolation if you do have a mental health challenge. Now, I want to go ahead and qualify that phrase I'm using, mental health challenge, A mental health challenge could be a mental health diagnosis, something that you're seeking professional help and support to walk through. But mental health is something that we all have. Mental health is health. So it's not determined on whether or not you have a specific diagnosis. A person that has no mental health diagnosis might still be having a mental health challenge because of circumstances in their life, things they've experienced that are really causing the breaking point in their mental health. Likewise, a person who has a mental health diagnosis might be doing very, very well with their treatment and their approach to life, and they may be having very good mental health at that moment. So when I say mental health challenge, it's an umbrella that covers mental health crises or mental health challenges that pop up for people in the moments that they're in right now. Now, I did mention that 1 in 3 people in the United States currently struggles with a mental health challenge that could be diagnosed and treated by a mental health professional. Now, that number used to be 1 in 4 before COVID. So thank you, COVID. Now that number is 1 in 3.
I wondered if it did that because it seems like that was an effect of COVID.
Yeah.
It did really bring that in. I mean, one of the things that I try to explain to people, and I'm not qualify this by saying that I'm not diagnosing anybody and I'm not giving anybody the tool to diagnose themselves. But I will explain a little bit about what I understand as one particular mental health challenge. If I'm in active duty and I'm serving overseas, and right around 2:00 in the morning is when the shelling starts, and so I wake up every morning at 2:00 in the morning as the base I'm having is under attack, then that's a normal response to danger. Now, 3 or 4 years later, when I've already out processed and I'm no longer in the service, and I'm still waking up at 2:00 in the morning, hypervigilant when I'm in my home, that's no longer a response to danger. That's more of a post-traumatic stress response. And it's usually to something that can be life-threatening or something that's perceived as being very harmful or dangerous to a person. Now, we took the entire world in 2020 and we told everybody that you're not going to be able to necessarily be safe, that we have this thing that's killing people. We don't know what to do about it. We have no treatments. You need to go home immediately, bring your family home immediately. We don't know if we can keep your family safe. And it took us a long time to figure out how to approach this from a pandemic stage to an endemic stage, where we finally got to a place where we had an approach to what to do about COVID. But for a large period of time, we didn't have that. And that created a lot of anxiety and frustration. It created a lot of fear. It created a lot of other detrimental stress responses from basically the entire population of the world. And when we were in the middle of that in 2020, that was a reasonable response to the type of information we were getting about what COVID was and what it could potentially do. Now we're in 2023 and we have a response. We know what we can do in terms of vaccinations and treatments and hospitalization and medical approaches, and also societal approaches that we have now that we can use to help mitigate the threat of COVID. So this is that point 2 or 3 years down the road when we're no longer behind the wire, so to speak. We're no longer in the stressful environment, but we're still starting to feel that hypervigilance, that same anxiety, that same struggle with interacting with other people. COVID was a big cause of isolation in a lot of people's lives, and isolation is one of the most deadly things that can happen to people with mental health challenges because it keeps us disconnected from community and keeps us disconnected from treatment. Mm-hmm. So I'm not saying that the entire world has PTSD, but what I am saying is that there's been a stressor that's out there, and it's starting to manifest itself in a lot of different types of mental health challenges that are starting to surface today.
Oh, that's true. I do totally see that. Not to mention it just caused so much division in our country going through that. So that kind of added to all of that.
It increased the type of stress and anxiety associated with it, the division that was there. I'm not claiming one side or the other is right or wrong in any of this, but the fact that there are two polarized camps that were there, that type of conflict and animosity has a psychosociological effect on the way that people work individually and that we work as community. It was divisive to families, divisive to organizations and churches and friend groups, and that compounded the stress and that compounded the challenge.
Yeah.
One of the other things that we talk about, just to shift gears quickly here, is in Celebrate Recovery, we're recovering from hurts, hangups, and habits. So it's not specifically substances. In fact, only 1 out of 3 people of the 5.5 million people that have gone through Celebrate Recovery's step studies, only 1 out of 3 of them have been there for a chemical issue. 2 out of 3 people attend Celebrate Recovery for something other than substances. So that can be everything from codependency to fear to working through relationship issues to sexual integrity or addiction issues, eating and body dysmorphic issues. So there's a whole range of things that people can be in recovery for. We have this slide that shows like 100 different things that people have been in recovery for. I call it the got it, need it slide because that's kind of what's going through my head when I'm looking at it. I'm like, okay, got that, need to be in recovery for that. And so that's how recovery works. Now, It's about addictive and compulsive behaviors, though, which are something that we all have a struggle with at one way or another, and in varying degrees. There's this thing called comorbidity. And what that means is that two things are happening simultaneously. And the comorbidity rate for addictive and compulsive behaviors and mental health challenges is 50%. That's 1 out of every 2 people that are struggling with a mental health challenge are also struggling with an addictive or compulsive behavior. And conversely, 1 out of every 2 people that are struggling with an addictive or compulsive behavior are also struggling with a mental health challenge. So whether you have a mental health challenge that you're trying to self-medicate through these addictive and compulsive behaviors, or you have an addictive and compulsive behavior that's changed your brain chemistry and a mental health challenge has resulted, the number is 50%. It's 1 out of 2 in recovery rooms.
That's interesting. Well, I went through a step study years ago. It was a long time ago. I was still married, but it was really helpful. I definitely recommend it because in a step study, you're in a closed group, so you're with the same people and you just start developing that trust. So I definitely recommend Celebrate Recovery. So anxiety and stress are prevalent, especially in the US. Did you struggle with anxiety and stress? And that's another issue for me as well. And can you explain what anxiety is and how we can manage and heal from it?
I do struggle with anxiety and stress, and I struggle with it clinically. I want to qualify my answer by saying that there's a difference between feeling of anxiety that you have when you have consistent triggers in your life that are making you anxious or that are causing you stress, and clinical anxiety, which is a brain chemistry reaction to those same types of stressors that's off balance. So for me, I struggle with clinical anxiety as part of my bipolar experience. Part of it is clinical anxiety. The other part is clinical depression. And so I alternate back and forth between these two where my brain chemistry heightens my awareness. It keeps me hypervigilant. And sometimes I fixate on certain ideas. Sometimes I have physiological responses like a racing heartbeat, pounding in my chest, sweating, panic attacks sometimes occur. So anxiety for me it's clinical anxiety is kind of an elevated state of anxiety. But anxiety, even if it is triggered and not necessarily clinical anxiety, is something that a lot of people experience. And it's more than just feeling worried. It's more than feeling nervous. It can involve those things, but there's a whole gamut of different reactions that the body and the mind can have to the stimulus that causes the anxiety. And so it's important to know that a lot of people experience that, and that if you're one of those people that experiences it, you're not alone. There are other people that experience anxiety. 1 out of every 5 people that have a mental health challenge experience anxiety as part of it, or in total. There's also various kinds of anxiety. One of the kinds of anxiety that is in my family is called social anxiety. And there are some elements of social anxiety where I've had to sit with a person that's in my family with social anxiety in the parking lot at Walmart for about 20 or 30 minutes before we can get out of the car because there's just too many people. It's too much and it's overwhelming. This person struggles with feeling that other people are looking at them and continuously judging them, or looking at them critically, or thinking about them, when most people are kind of wandering through life day to day, just kind of barely focusing on their own efforts and much less other people. Mm-hmm. So social anxiety is a type of anxiety, and there are other types as well, and they can definitely cause stress. One of the things I would encourage people is if you're feeling a type of anxiety, that you don't just dismiss it. It's something that's affecting your life and affecting your quality of life. It's something that you might want to reach out and talk to somebody and see if there's something you can do about it. I know that my grandparents were very bad about going to the doctor. My grandpa especially, he was a general contractor in construction for years. And he had moments where he'd accidentally drive a nail through his finger and not go to the doctor. He'd just pull it out, put on duct tape, and move on with his life. And that can't be good. So I think we're getting better at seeing the value of seeing people that are medical providers and mental health providers and the services that they provide, to where we don't have to just kind of tough it up, put on duct tape and baling wire around whatever our struggle is and just go on with it, because that's ultimately not healthy. We have the ability to reach out to someone and just ask the questions and then find out what the options are. I think if you're someone that struggles with anxiety, or if stress pushes you to anxiety, or the other side of that, depression or any other mood destabilization that you might experience, that seeking some help from somebody that's taken some time to become an expert in it and has read some good books and dedicated a portion of their life to wanting to help other people with it, that's probably a very good first step.
That's good.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So a good first step you're giving is to differentiate whether it is clinical or something that's triggering.
Yeah, like a situational.
Yeah.
And I think you can do that also. And it's important to understand how deep your depression goes. If you find or suspect that you have clinical depression, I would say go directly to help. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. I would say that's a direct line for that. But even if you're experiencing anxiety, but not necessarily clinical anxiety, it's still okay to reach out and find some help and find some counsel from someone that can help you out with that.
Yeah. Everyone, I think, has anxiety at some point, and it is not a good feeling.
Yeah, it isn't.
It is not a good feeling.
It just runs in our family, I think. I mean, my mom was just a very anxious person. Me and my sister are more prone to be anxious. But yeah.
And I think there's some things that can help when you seek some help. One of the things that a lot of providers will talk about are the thoughts, the actions, the feelings, and beliefs behind what you're experiencing. And there's a lot of recovery deals in that area too. And that's that if we look at what's going on, the why behind the what, then if you can address the why, then the what's happening gets better and sometimes even dissipates completely. So just knowing that maybe the why behind being anxious is something that is a learned behavior that, in my family, there was a lot of that. My mom felt anxious quite a bit. And so I just learned that that was a natural response to dealing with life. But also there might be something that's biochemical going on. There might be something that is a health issue or another issue that's making your anxiety feel worse. So your body is already exhausted from working through some other issue, and the anxiety just keeps getting worse because your body doesn't have the margin or capacity to be able to handle that. So there's a lot of different approaches that can help alleviate it.
Yeah, I have complex PTSDs from being abused by my ex-husband. And when I first got out of that relationship, I was in chronic fight or flight. It took me about 18 months of working on that and, getting a healthy lifestyle and all the things you probably, did when you were diagnosed to finally know what my normal had to become calm. Like my new normal was calm, finally. And sometimes it's not, but I work hard on it. So I think that's all we can do. So in your testimony, you say that you were depressed and explain depression in a way that made me question if I've ever really been depressed. Can you expound a little on that and how our listeners can get help?
Absolutely. Again, just like anxiety you can have anxious moments or have anxiety, and you can also have clinical anxiety. The same thing is true with depression. Depression is a natural emotional response that we have built into us that helps us process grief or loss. It helps us process a slowing down of our system. But there are types of triggers that can create sadness or disconnection from other people or mood reactions that are like depression that people can experience. What I like to say is that if you can think of a normal trigger that you've experienced that you can associate with your feeling, it's not just the trigger that is there. It's the amount of time you spend in the response. I lost a very good friend recently who passed away, and I felt very down about that. And I grieved that and through a grieving process for that. But I knew I was in a process that was triggered by a loss, and I found myself progressing through it. And ultimately, while I still miss my friend, I don't have that same level of depressed feeling around it. That's a progression that was an appropriate amount of time, so to speak. If you find yourself stuck in a place where you're not moving forward, even after the events have come and gone, that's one of the indicators that you might need to seek out some other help. Also, clinical depression is experienced in those same reasons where your brain chemistry just isn't supporting what you need. I don't want to bore anybody with serotonin and dopamine conversations and all of that. You're just struggling in a way that has a detrimental and profound impact on your ability to stay engaged in your life, whether it's having an impact in your work or your school or your professional life, if it's causing disconnections in your interpersonal relationships. If you're experiencing guilt and shame feelings because of the depression you're having, there's quality of life issues that can come into play. There's coping mechanisms that might be unhealthy that you might be picking up because you have these depressions and you're trying to lift your own spirits. A lot of these are indicators that you might have something that's undiagnosable and might need to be worked through with a professional. But depression is definitely not just being sad. You can be sad, and that can be a part of it, but there's so much more to it. One of the experiences I had with depression, and that I do continue to have when I have depressive cycles, is I feel like I've physically been hit by a truck. I mean, my body is sore and it aches and it's hard to move. Now, I know I'm getting older, and some of that I can attribute to that too, but it's just that feeling that I've had the flu for a week and the body aches are very real. And that's a physiological response to depression. And so there's more to it than just the emotional aspects. Disengagement's one of those things where it's hard to find pleasure in things that I've enjoyed doing in the past. One of my favorite things to do is I've got a brother in Chicago, and the two of us will connect by going online and playing video games online for an hour or two a week, just to, not so much to play the games, mostly to talk. And it's kind of an excuse to spend a couple hours with each other. And that's something I really love doing. But when I'm in a depressed state, whether it's a depressive cycle of bipolar disorder or it's just a level of depression, I just don't feel the motivation to go do that. I don't, as much as I might want to in my mind, I just can't compel myself to go ahead and do it, even though it's something I really enjoy. So I think that just like everything else that we experience in life, there are degrees of things. There are mild, medium, and severe experiences that people can have, even within themselves, much less with other people. So I would encourage folks not to kind of use other folks as your barometer as to whether or not you're having an experience. I might be feeling depressed, but I'm not as depressed as my friend, or I'm not as depressed as this person on the podcast was describing. I would say compare it to what you normally feel on a regular given day. And if you're higher or lower than that, then that's a good indicator as to what you should do.
Okay. That makes sense. So I was comparing myself with what your description was during the meeting.
And it's very normal to do that. I mean, especially with something that you might not, like for me, when I first started going through bipolar disorder, I didn't quite understand it. So I didn't know really what it was. So my only frame of reference was to go out online and start looking stuff up and try to figure that out, or think about people that I knew that were bipolar and compare myself to them. And first off, if you're going to go online to find out if you're healthy, just don't do that.
Yeah.
just don't.
End up well.
No.
If you've gone to WebMD before, and no matter what's wrong with you, you're dying. That's just kind of what's happening. The same thing's true with mental health. If you go out there and you start looking up mental health challenges and what's out there, there's not a lot of hope. Everything seems very down and very hopeless, and not a lot of future involved in that. I'm here to tell you that that's not the case. That especially when you start plugging in Christ into your recovery, especially when you start plugging other people into your life, you start to realize that there is hope out there. And that hope is something you can live in and rest in and thrive in. But the online environment, they're not going to tell you that. So just kind of don't use the internet if you can to self.
It's going to increase your anxiety for sure.
Your anxiety and depression, because you're not around people, you're sitting online.
Yeah. Exactly. And then see the worst case scenarios. So I'm really interested in this question. So you talked a little bit about bipolar, and it's another mental health condition many struggle with and that you can relate to. Can you explain what this is and how you're able to diagnose, treat, and heal from it?
Yeah, absolutely. Bipolar disorder, it kind of takes those two extremes we've already talked about, where you have an anxiety that elevates itself to something called mania, where it's hyperanxiety and hyperfocus and a lot of outlandish and anxious behaviors. And then the other extreme of that is severe depression, where it's depressive sometimes to the point of being debilitating and not being able to function. And bipolar disorder is kind of what it sounds like. You've got these two poles of anxiety at one end and depression at the other, and you rotate back and forth between them. And with bipolar disorder, the key is the movement back and forth. There are some conditions like anxiety with depressive disorder, which means I spend most of my time in the year with anxiety, but every so often I have a season of depression. There's depressive disorder with anxiety. I spend the vast majority of my time maybe in depression, but I have some anxiety that comes up when there are a brief season of anxiety. Bipolar disorder talks about alternating back and forth between these two extremes in what we call cycles, which happens one or more times, maybe two or more times in a year. And some people, like myself, are rapid cycling bipolar, which means that we experience several of these cycles throughout a year. Other folks might experience 2 to 3 of these alternations back and forth between anxiety and depression in that year. And so what it does is it creates a level of imbalance. It creates a difficulty in understanding how you're going to approach your day and how you're going to approach the experiences of your life, because my approaches to life are very different depending on which part of that cycle I'm in. If I'm depressed, I try real hard not to make a lot of plans, because I know that I'm not going to have a lot of energy, that it's going to be a struggle to get some things done. As a student with depression, it's really hard to write papers and read and get motivated to do things. On the flip side, with anxiety, it's a really great way to have extra anxious energy to start a lot of things, but not necessarily finish them. So there's a lot of half projects, a lot of half papers, a lot of half written works. There's a lot of effort, but not a lot of focus, which makes it very difficult to be able to complete things. So in depression, not being able to start, with anxiety, not being able to complete. And so learning where I'm at in these cycles helps me plan out, okay, this is where I'm going to need extra help in getting going, getting motivated. Okay, this is where I'm going to need extra help in seeing things through to the end. And so that's kind of the bipolar experience, is going back and forth between these cycles. There's an ugly thing in the middle called a mixed state. And a mixed state is when you feel both anxiety and depression at the same time. It's the worst of both experiences, and it makes lucidity and making sense of your world and reality almost impossible to kind of navigate and grasp, because there's no real clear way of which direction to go or what approach to take. So bipolar, you're moving back and forth between these two extremes, and a lot of it has to do with brain chemistry. I like to explain brain chemistry, or at least my own bipolar brain chemistry, in terms of a garden hose you're using to wash your car. So if you've ever used a garden hose to wash your car, there's kind of like 3 settings. There's the setting where the water just flows out of it. And then there's the setting where you pinch the hose off so you can shut the water off and just barely it drips by, but the water is staying in the hose. And then there's that spot in the middle where you open it up just a little bit and it's like a power sprayer and all of the water comes out fast. In my depressive times, it's kind of like that trickle. And in my anxious manic times, it's that garden hose spray where it's coming out like a power sprayer. And so my brain chemistry either is getting way too much or not nearly enough of the brain chemistry that's necessary to keep my moods regulated. And very few times in my life am I experiencing that regular flow of brain chemistry. So it's alternating back and forth between those. The reason I mention that is because the diagnostic process of being able to know where you're at in bipolar disorder talks about recognizing your anxiety and your depression and the frequency of these cycles and the severity of these cycles. There's excellent clinical tools that a trained counselor or a psychiatrist will use to walk you through those. The treatment a lot of times is coupled with both talk therapy, typically, and also a medication. For me, medication helps me stabilize my moods. In fact, it's a mood stabilizer I take that lets the chemistry that's barely going on spread out enough to kind of cover things up. I liken it to when you're running out of ketchup and you put a little extra water in there and shake the bottle up and I get a little extra ketchup. It's the same way with my brain chemistry. When I'm in those depressive sides, the mood stabilizers help me have enough of those brain chemicals to keep my emotions balanced. And then they also help me reabsorb when there's too much. So it keeps the right balance. And so there's other specific medications for the anxiety side and depressive side. So chemically speaking, medications are out there. And I want to tell folks that it's okay to use them. God has created very smart people and he's given them lab coats. And he's given them training to learn how to operate in science in a way that helps support you and helps keep you treated. Just like we wouldn't discourage somebody with insulin or with diabetes from taking insulin, or somebody with a heart condition from taking a medication like lisinopril or something else for their blood pressure or their heart. We shouldn't discourage anybody from taking medications for the brain, which is just another organ in the body. And so I would encourage people, especially people from the Christian background that might have heard that medicine might be a sign of a weak faith or it's not something you should depend on, to just discard those lies and discard those myths and get rid of that stigma and just think about stewarding the body that God gave you as best as you possibly can. And sometimes that's going to require extra help, which would be medication. Another area is in therapy, is in talking this out. I love to think of my therapist as a person who I pay to be objective in my life. I've got people that love me very much and are very concerned about me. And some of them will tell me things that make me feel better. And some of them will tell me things that they're really scared because they're very close to me that might be kind of the worst of what I'm experiencing. But my therapist, my counselor, they're going to care about me, but they're not so tied to loving me that they might have a bias one way or another as to what I'm experiencing. And so by being able to be objective and caring at the same time, they can see options and how to think and react and how to approach some of the challenges that come alongside bipolar disorder. So in terms of treating it, medication is an excellent treatment. Counseling is definitely an excellent treatment. There are physiological things you can do, such as making sure you're getting sleep and the right diet and exercise, the things that give your body a fighting chance to use the resources that may or may not be limited at that time. So those are good things too. But the two main are medication and therapy. How to heal from it is a whole other experience. For me, healing isn't the absence of symptoms because it's the way I'm designed. I'm going to have these experiences throughout my life, and I'm learning to be okay with that. For me, healing is the reliance on taking care of it or stewarding this life that God's given me and relying on his will for my life to be able to walk out what I'm doing while I have those symptoms. So when I struggle and maybe I'm manic and I hurt someone's feelings because I'm terse or I'm short or I'm abrasive, when I do that, I might not be aware that I've done that. So that might be bipolar doing that. And so I'm not in recovery for bipolar disorder, but when I'm aware that I've hurt somebody and I'm made aware that I might need to reach out to somebody and make an amends and try to make things right as best as I can as far as it depends on me. That's the area where my recovery comes in. That's where my healing happens, is the returning back to what God wants me to do in the moments I have the capacity to do it. So that's the long answer to diagnosing, treating, and healing.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions on that. So you would have to get diagnosed for that. I mean, where would someone go if they are suspecting that? Would they have to go to a psychologist or?
There's a lot of different open doors to starting that process.
To be continued. Stay tuned for next week's part 2. You don't want to miss it.
Thanks for tuning in to Hanging On to Hope. Check out our website, hangingontohope.org. There are resources on there, and if you would like to donate or volunteer, you can do that through our website. We are a brand new nonprofit, so we appreciate any and all support. And we thank you for listening, and until next time, keep hanging on to hope. We are evidence that there is hope and healing for you, and our passion is to help you find it too. So thanks for tuning in.
Thanks for listening, everyone.